Ladies and gentlemen, when I received the invitation, I was sent the program, I was a bit daunted because it said, who should we trust? And there's about a paragraph below that saying shareholders, government and regulators are formulating new rules and demands in the wake of transparency and failures in risk management and governance. Is this the right answer? How do we get the right people in control and get assurance that the rules are followed and work as planned? Session will examine what is working, what isn't, and what is required to build a better structure for the future. The main topic is, who should we trust? I would like to highlight to you just my own thoughts in respect of internal auditors. And I say this not because I'm appearing before you, but I think internal auditors have the most difficult role. And one of the reasons why you have the most difficult role, as opposed to external auditors, is you actually work within the organization. And you are in fact auditing your own peers. So the type of pressure that's on you is completely different to what, for example, an external auditor may face. And I think, you know, I've seen this myself in respect of when I was working in the private sector. I would like to today just to highlight some of the general points in respect of the rules that are currently in place, some of the new rules that are going to be brought into place, and how it does have an impact on you. Some of them not directly, but indirectly. But also to talk about just generally some principles. I don't think we can trust any single individual. What needs to be trusted, or who needs to be trusted, is the actual system and the process. Sometimes, and as we've seen in various external examples like Enron and various other monumental goof-ups, you might say, there was an emphasis on form rather than substance. Similarly, in order to have a system that's going to work, the entire organization needs to buy in to the idea of what is now sometimes maybe called very cliched terms of good governance, of transparency. You cannot, for example, expect the internal auditor to be doing the job properly if the management stops you from investigating beyond a particular point. If the person or the area or the department in which you are carrying out your work, there is somebody who's the favorite of the management. If, for example, people are appointed in that organization not on merit, but because of who they know and the connections they have with the management. These are everyday issues. So the buy-in needs to be by the entire organization, not just by the internal auditor. Now, recently we've had some changes to the law. As you know, there's corporate criminal liability. I'm sure the other speakers will also talk about it. Former High Court Judge Justice Shamim is here. She will also talk about corruption issues tomorrow. But the new elements that have been brought in, corporate criminal liability, for example, places a very high level of onus on the managerial systems in place within a corporation. Now, for example, in order to be able to escape criminal liability or criminal responsibility for the corporate, for criminal acts of high managerial agent, it must show that it exercised due diligence to control the activities of the high managerial agent. So you must show within your organization that there is a particular adherence to a system for you to be able to not fall within that particular offense. Similarly, the new companies law that's about to come into effect, we hope by 1 January of next year, and I urge all of you to attend the Attorney General's conference, which will be held here in early December, where there will be a session on that particular new law that's going to come out. It will affect all of you. But it places a higher level of onus and highlighting the fiduciary duty that directors have to their own company, where they must, for example, be able to, they have a duty to exercise independent judgment, duty to exercise reasonable care, skill and diligence, duty to avoid conflict of interest, duty not to accept benefits from third parties, and duty to declare interest in proposed transaction or arrangement. these are very clear, enunciated provisions that will be within the new law. Now, it does mean, and it has a flow-down effect on you. For the directors to be able to show that they're actually in compliance with the new company law, they must have the systems and processes within the organization itself. So it places a greater burden and onus on the internal auditors to be able to ensure that the company is always up to speed as far as these systems and processes are concerned. I'll give you an example. When I was in the private sector, and this is to do with an external auditor, there was a person who was the head of finance, who in fact was extremely close to the external auditor. They used to have dinners, lunches, family picnics together. It was in fact, from where I stood, it was a very uncomfortable relationship. But more so it got pronounced when the external auditor had a spouse working within the company. And that external auditor was in fact auditing that particular department. Now, when I raised this issue, that person did not speak to me for, I think, about 3 or 4 months. And eventually, the head office in Australia tweaked to this, and then the option was given to the spouse whether they stay on and the external auditor goes, whether the external auditor stays and the spouse goes. And the spouse ended up resigning from the company. But the amount of pressure as at that time, an assistant general manager was in fact quite a lot. So you had to be able to stand your own ground. And what I would urge you that, and hopefully there amongst you there are also managers, not just internal auditors, that in order for the internal auditor to be able to carry out their work with utmost professionalism, that you must be given the right level of support. Because at the end of the day, your role, and you must see this, you're not there essentially to please anybody. You're there to essentially ensure that the company is in compliance with the systems or processes that are already in place, or other general rules of adherence to transparency and good governance. And that is critical. And I know it can be quite difficult sometimes to be able to do so, but it is what your job is. And I think this is where the Institute can play a critical role to be able to give support to your members. And I would urge the Institute to be able to create that environment, to draw up relationships perhaps with organizations even like FICAC, organizations, other support groups. I mean, notwithstanding the fact that at the moment that there is no law specific where bribery or corruption between private companies fall within the ambit of FICAC, but only if they have public officers involved. But obviously that's something that can be looked at in the future, because you have other countries that have in fact brought that in within the ambit of an independent corruption commission. I think generally what we need to do is to be able to, the processes need to be made well known within the organization. And I think, again, in some of the organizations, the rules that exist aren't well known by every single individual within the organization. Similarly, if the rules are known, then the various disciplinary processes that flow on from that must always be adhered to. I know the PS Finance will talk to you tomorrow afternoon, but the civil service for over a number of years has, in that respect, the disciplinary processes has fallen by the wayside, where the rules in respect of the disciplinary processes have not been applied in a systemic manner, in a uniform fashion, and in fact have been applied selectively. So that's where problems also arise, because it has an impact on the internal auditor. Because if you are going to carry out an internal audit, and if you identify an anomaly within the system, and that anomaly is not followed through either by way of disciplinary processes or either by way of ensuring that that does not happen again, you will in fact be quite disheartened from in fact following on those processes or identifying those problems again. I know many of you are shaking your head, because at the ground level, that in many organizations that's a reality. So that, in terms of building the system within the organization, you need to take a holistic approach, where your work, where your identification of the anomalies that may exist within the system, and I don't necessarily mean it's always about picking on people or identifying persons, but it's also within the processes itself. I mean, banks, for example, are a classic example, where sometimes the processes that are in place are not cognizant of or do not take into account the changes that are taking place within the banking system itself, or the contemporary changes that are taking place. Many of your rules and processes may have been something that was relevant to 5 or 10 years ago, but are no longer relevant, whether because the laws have changed, whether, for example, new technologies have come in, and therefore those systems and processes need to be updated. So in that respect, I think what we need to do is to be able to always, as internal auditors, be able to identify those anomalies, and the management needs to have a buy-in to that system. There are many instances, for example, what we've seen is that the companies that do provide internal auditors, or the capacity with that, they are not able to, again, provide the right management skills or be able to provide the right capacity for the internal auditors themselves. As I said about technology, and I think Roscoe will also talk to you about these systems, talking about various private organizations, the internal capacities within the internal audit team needs to be up to speed with the changes that are taking place. And I think that is a very critical issue. I cannot really highlight to you or overstate to you how critical it is to ensure that the internal audit compliance team needs to be always having the support, the right technology support, needs to have the right personnel support, and of course the right management support. So overall, in respect of who should we trust, we should be able to trust the system. And the system needs to be up to speed with what that particular company requires. I see that in your sessions later on today, and of course tomorrow, you've got quite specific topics. You've got some external speakers who are speaking to you about these areas. But I think overall, if I could convey only one message, and that is to please always ensure that your ability to highlight the issues from your internal audits must take precedence ahead of any other considerations, because that is your job. And your level of professionalism and identification as a professional will always depend on that. We have seen many problems, for example, where we have had, and I can talk to you about various state-owned organizations, various statutory bodies, where unfortunately the internal auditors have succumbed to the pressures of management. And unfortunately also, the external auditors have succumbed to the idea of continuously getting their fees. So you have people who are external auditors who have audited firms for the past 20 years, past 15 years, just so they can get their fees, and overlooked many of the anomalies, and frankly in collusion with many of the internal auditors. And it overall undermines your entire profession. And that we should avoid at all costs, because at the end of the day, it's not just a cost to your sense as a professional, or how people identify you as a professional, but also a cost to that particular organization, and at the end of the day, a cost to the nation. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all the best in your deliberations this morning, and I look forward to meeting many of you later on today. Thank you.